Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, what we thought, since we are talking about HIV, tuberculosis, so we thought that we'll give an overview of hydrocephalus and a little bit about tuberculous meningitis, which leads to hydrocephalus. So I'll be going through the whole series of hydrocephalus, congenital as well as the acquired type. Now clinically you have seen what hydrocephalus looks like. It is very often the congenital types are having a prenatal origin which is manifested postnatally, which now stands corrected because now very often we are able to pick up hydrocephalus prenatally or antenatally, and therefore we are ready for the child postnatally, and therefore we can operate on the child soon after the child is born. Now there can be genetic effect and there can be chromosomal anomalies as well as prenatal infection like TORCH, any one of those, which can give rise to hydrocephalus in the fetus. Now, congenital hydrocephalus basically is either a primary maldevelopment of the brain or a secondary destructive like the hydranencephaly, which I will be showing you. Now, what basically is hydrocephalus in terms of physiology and anatomy is that it's an imbalance of CSF formation and absorption such that the net accumulation of fluid, so there is excess of CSF in the brain or in the ventricles, and that is the main problem because of which hydrocephalus occurs. Now just a little bit background about the normal anatomy physiology. That the rate of formation of CSF is about 500 ml per day. Total CSF volume is around 150 ml in children, which means every 8 hourly the CSF is being renewed. And it is found mainly in the choroid plexus and in the brain parenchyma. The circulation, if you must know, just in short, is there are the lateral ventricles, from there through the interventricular foramen of Monro to the third ventricle, from there through the aqueduct of Sylvius, which is going to be important from aqueductal stenosis point of view. So through the aqueduct of Sylvius into the fourth ventricle. From fourth ventricle it has three types, either the lateral tube or the single medium or downwards. I am not going to go, but just to show you the anatomy, that's how it flows. It goes from above, that is the lateral ventricle, down into the third ventricle, down into the fourth ventricle, and then all around the brain as well as into the spinal cord. So that is the circulation. And from there, the cisterna magna across the brains, below the, around the spinal cord, through the central canal. So basically it's like a circulation like blood. And anywhere if there is an obstruction or a improper passage, you are going to get hydrocephalus. So hydrocephalus can be either what is known as non-communicating, which is obstructive in one of these, from lateral to third, third to fourth, fourth and out. Or it can be beyond that, and therefore that is known as a non-communicating. And the propulsion or the circulation per se of the CSF could be because of various factors. One is the outpouring, second is the ciliary action, third is the ventricular pulsation and the pressure gradient across the arachnoid villi, which is where the thing is absorbed. See, the absorption of the CSF is either arachnoid villi, ventricular ependyma, leptomeninges and lymphatics. Now this is important even when you look at meningomyelocele with hydrocephalus, where after meningomyelocele is closed, suddenly the hydrocephalus comes up. It's because the leptomeninges or the meningeal membrane which covers the meningomyelocele, we excise, and therefore the absorptive area goes down, and therefore it can also give rise to hydrocephalus. Again, pathogenesis, as I said, is either obstruction, over-secretion or improper drainage. Any one of these three can give rise to the hydrocephalus, and it can be either congenital or acquired. Congenital is of course due to various causes. They can be prenatal radiation exposure, intrauterine infection, inheritance, that is genetic, or it is acquired like meningitis, trauma in an old child or an infant, spontaneous intracranial bleed. This is more common in prematures where they have an intraventricular bleed, and that leads to an hydrocephalus. Or some tumors, congenital brain tumors, which can give rise to secondary hydrocephalus. Now, congenital is usually proximal to the fourth ventricle, which means it's in the obstructive or the non-communicating type of a thing, where most of them are aqueductal stenosis. The second most common would be Arnold-Chiari malformation type 2, which is usually associated with meningomyelocele. So whenever we see a meningomyelocele, think about hydrocephalus with Arnold-Chiari malformation. There can be atresia of foramen disca magenti, intracranial masses, and even mumps virus associated with aqueductal stenosis. This is what I was saying with meningomyelocele. 90% of the children with meningomyelocele may have an Arnold-Chiari type 2 malformation, and therefore hydrocephalus may be present at birth, or it may develop soon after, or it may develop soon after the surgery on the meningomyelocele. And this hydrocephalus usually starts, as I said, within a week of closure. When we excise the excess of the membrane and do the closure of the meningomyelocele, that's when the hydrocephalus starts blowing up. And if you are not careful or not following up, you may miss the hydrocephalus and give rise to parenchymal brain damage. Now these are the issues which are because of the Arnold-Chiari malformation, where there is a caudal displacement of the cerebellum of the fourth ventricle, fusion of the displaced tissue. This is basically Arnold-Chiari malformation type 2, which leads to blockage of the foramina magenti and therefore gives rise to hydrocephalus, and which needs to be treated. See, this is the classical one where the cerebellum has sort of herniated down into the spinal cord and it is getting blocked, and which is why there may be a hydrocephalus. CT scan would show grossly dilated ventricles, which would tell you that this is definitely hydrocephalus. Now, only thing is, if the fontanelle is open, ultrasound is still an option to do a good ultrasound of the skull to look for hydrocephalus. But once the fontanelle closes, there is no way ultrasound is going to help you, in which case CT or an MRI would be an option. This shows again dilated. Now there is what is known as the Dandy-Walker malformation, which is a posterior fossa cyst. There is usually a huge cyst which communicates with a large fourth ventricle, and usually due to blocked foramen magenti. And this is one of the cases where you can see a huge posterior cyst of the what is known as the Dandy-Walker cyst. Now in this case there may be hydrocephalus which can be seen up and a posterior. So the treatment with a shunt may be putting in a shunt into the ventricle as well as into the posterior fossa. Now hydranencephaly is a different thing from hydrocephalus. There is almost a complete absence of cerebrum, and this is because it's like a stroke which is prenatal. Out of the three cerebral arteries, the anterior and the middle are both totally blocked, and therefore there is no brain, it's only fluid. Now, sometimes you get these kind of things. Now the problem occurs is with antenatal diagnosis, with spurt of interventions and all these things which have become very aggressive, a mistaken diagnosis of hydrocephalus should not be made in hydranencephaly, because hydranencephaly has a very poor prognosis. Hydrocephalus does not necessarily have such a poor prognosis. So in a hydranencephaly, if we do a cesarean section to deliver the child and then ultimately the child is going to be lost, we should be careful before making a diagnosis of hydrocephalus instead of hydranencephaly, because this is what is seen. There is no brain matter, it's all fluid. So therefore, in these cases, even if we put in a shunt postnatally, I doubt whether the brain parenchyma is going to increase or the functioning is going to be better. With hydrocephalus, an early treatment is important. Meningomyelocele closure may be followed by a shunt, or if already there is a hydrocephalus with meningomyelocele, then we usually do the shunt first, decrease the hydrocephalus pressure as well as the pressure in the meningomyelocele, and then go in for a closure of the meningomyelocele. Now these are the types of meningomyelocele. The one on the upper left is a skin covered good meningomyelocele. The one below is partial skin covered, partial membranous. And this is the spinal rachis where there is no covering. What you see right down in the center is an opened up spinal cord, no covering. And these are the ones with a very poor prognosis in terms of both bladder bowel incontinence, paraplegia, as well as hydrocephalus. So these are the ones with real poor prognosis. The one with good skin cover may not be so bad. But when you see meningomyelocele, think about paraparesis or paraplegia, think about bladder bowel incontinence, think about associated hydrocephalus, and treat the child as a whole. This is spina bifida occulta, where there is no gross obvious meningomyelocele, but a tuft of hair or a hemangioma there. Any of these things, think about spina bifida. Acquired hydrocephalus, on the other hand, is usually distal to, so it's what is known as the communicating hydrocephalus. And this is usually caused by fibrosis of the leptomeninges due to either meningitis or due to bleeding. Now symptoms in infants will be very vague: poor feeding, irritability, reduced activity, vomiting, which can be said for many other infantile problems also. So it's not specific for hydrocephalus. But if you look at for the signs, yes, head enlargement, disjunction of sutures, dilated scalp pain, tense fontanelle, setting sun sign as they call it, sunset sign, and increased lymph nodes. These are the things which you will see. See the enlargement of the head, here you can see the dilated veins with the tense fontanelle, and these veins do not collapse. Normally if you just push your fingers across, most of the veins will remain collapsed. Here they will not collapse. This is the classic sunset sign where the eyes are going down. This is usually due to sixth nerve, abducens nerve palsy, which is part and parcel of the hydrocephalus. And therefore, even after we do the shunt, the sunset sign may not disappear for a long time. It may still be persistent. So don't expect that to go back the next day. So these are typical, again, huge dilated skull with dilated veins. Again, you can see congestion of the scalp veins. This is the child just being taken off for surgery. Symptoms in older children. Here it will be slowing of more subtle signs, slowing of mental capacity, maybe headaches, neck pain, vomiting, blurred vision. Because see, when the fontanelle is open, papilledema is less chances because the skull can still expand. The brain can still expand, but once the fontanelle closes, which means in older children, there is no way the brain can expand, and therefore papilledema, which can rapidly progress to optic atrophy, is a possibility. Endocrine problems like stunted growth, precocious puberty, all these things may also be evidence of a hydrocephalus in a child. Difficulty in walking, spasticity, see, because if you see the anatomy of the brain, the top part is where the foot is, and therefore when the lateral ventricles get expanded because of the hydrocephalus, that is the part which gets stretched. Therefore the lower limbs are affected far early, so you get either a spasticity or a weakness in the lower limbs first. Again, signs, papilledema, if it is not corrected, you can go into optic atrophy. Failure of upward gaze, as I said, that is the sunset sign. Macedon sign is crackpot resonance, as they call it. Unsteady gait, spasticity in the lower limbs, again part and parcel of raised intracranial pressure, large head, and the abducens nerve palsy. Clinical, of course, as I said, this is just a summary of whatever can be done in infants and or children. Clinical pathology. Looking at the child's head, you may be able to make a rough diagnosis as to what is the cause. If it is aqueductal stenosis, the entire skull will be enlarged, maybe the posterior fossa may not be so much. In communicating, it will be symmetrically enlarged, and whereas in the dandy walker, it's just the enlargement of the posterior fossa, which would give you a rough idea as to where you are expecting the problem. Now there are what are known as hydrocephalus syndromes, which are four. One is acute chronic normal pressure hydrocephalus and an arrested hydrocephalus. Now what is the difference? Is in acute it is a sudden, we are talking in terms of hours. And this can be caused either by a spontaneous bleed, a huge posterior fossa tumor, exudative meningitis, head trauma, or in a patient who has already been shunted, if there is a shunt obstruction, that child can go into an acute hydrocephalus. In chronic, we are talking about 3 or more weeks, so it's a very gradual procedure. There may be compensatory adjustments since it is occurring over 3 weeks or more. Vague symptoms, vomiting, failing mental function, memory loss, etc. Normal pressure hydrocephalus. Now here, it's an irony that this is where the CSF pressure is normal. So the intracranial pressure of the CSF is not raised, but there is a pressure gradient between the cerebral ventricles and brain parenchyma. So if you do subsequent CTs or an ultrasound or whatever, you will find that the brain parenchyma definitely is thinning and the ventricles are gradually increasing. The important is that if this is there, you need to put in a shunt. You need a shunt to get the pressure gradient is normal, but at least prevent the ventricles from further enlarging. Whereas arrested hydrocephalus, not only is the pressure normal, but whereas the pressure gradient also has been taken away, so therefore there is no further increase in the size of the ventricle. And in these cases, yes, shunt may not be required at all. Investigation, as I said, plain X-ray skull used to be a common investigation when CT, MRI were not there for all those metal beaten and thumb printing and all those things, which now are really superfluous with a good CT or an MRI. But still in poor patients who cannot afford, you may still go by the plain X-ray. Now whether treatment of hydrocephalus is important or what is the significance is when they went through untreated hydrocephalus, a 10-year survival is only in 46% of the cases. And the intellectual impairment occurred in almost 62% in untreated hydrocephalus. Those who were treated with a shunt, the 10-year survival went up to almost 95%. And the intellectual, actually that's a wrong thing, it's 38%. It's not 62%. The intellectual impairment came down to 38%. Continued problems due to shunt dependency for life now. This is another thing which is worth the shunt, always the shunt. So if a child has been put on a shunt, very often when they grow up, they come to us and say, how long is this shunt going to be there? Can we take it out? I said, no, you can't take it out. Because if you take it out and it starts blowing up again, then a reinsertion will be required, which is very difficult. If it is not giving problems,